Welcome back to this next presentation. I'm very happy today to introduce to you Wesley Roslin Smith, which is now my colleague. I've known him for a long time. He's been my student. He did his master's degree on business rescue plans, and what we want to do today is discuss business rescue planning. And we discuss the plan in the context of the previous presentation, where we said ultimately success depends on the vote, and the vote depends on the plan. And what are then the components that we require in the plan? So we are going to look at previous research that we have done on this, and then explore from there on in order to achieve a better understanding of what are all the issues that's required in a plan. Maybe the best way to proceed with this is to start immediately, and I'm going to give Wesley the opportunity to introduce the subject, and then we will just have enjoyable discussion associated with a business rescue plan.
Well, hi everyone. I think we have to go back a step and actually see where the research actually initiated from. And our background analysis indicated that we looked at the first set of plans that came out and discovered that there were quite a lot of shortfalls with regards to a lot of the plans weren't adhering to the minimum conditions stipulated in the Act. I give you the example of just liabilities of the company and so forth. These components weren't actually being addressed in the plans.
So what we're really saying is that those initial plans that came out, they lacked the information for any creditor to vote on it in order to support or not support.
Massively. We went even further and looked at other additional elements that people requested. For example, the tax position of the company. You know, where did SARS sit? Hardly any plans addressed that. We then went on the effect of the balance sheet on the company. Virtually no plans at that stage covered those aspects. Very interesting enough, we noticed that there was no mention of cash flow in the majority of plans, and we discovered that it wasn't a stipulated requirement in Section 150 of the Act, which brought our attention to the fact was maybe the Act is not sufficient in terms of addressing all the required content that needs to be in a rescue plan.
Well, if you think about a post-commencement investor, someone who must put money in the business, how can they at all consider something like that if they do not have a cash flow projection and the associated assumptions? So maybe, Wesley, what I think we must do is let us go now to guidelines. What guidelines should we use? Are there guidelines for us to say this is what must be included in a rescue plan?
Well, what we actually decided to do then is that we took the 4 leading regimes right across the world, and we built a set of international principles using them. They consisted of the United States, Canada, the UK, and Australia. And what we did is we discovered these international principles and then tried to apply them to the South African context. The principles consisted of, firstly, that a rescue plan had to be a tool for feasibility declaration. It needed to be a medium of communication.
Just one step back. Do you think? Okay, let's look at the list maybe, and then we will take them individually in more detail. Okay. And then I will ask you those questions because I need to understand also some of the results.
Perfect. We can then start. Yeah. So it's a medium of communication. It needs to enable transparency. Very key. It has contractual obligations. And finally, the plan had to attract and secure post-commencement financing. So those were the 5 elements that had to a plan internationally would need to cater for.
Okay, so let's take them one by one, because when you mentioned the elements, I thought the feasibility declaration is now a new word in all the presentations. Is there any way to maybe explore that to the terminology that we generally use?
Feasibility declaration's got to do with reasonable prospect. You're basically determining whether the company can afford to go through a formal reorganization. Obviously, business rescue is a lot higher costs. There's a different set of environment that the company needs to now operate in. So all of these things have to be taken into account when determining if the company is actually feasible or does have a reasonable prospect.
Okay. Now that makes a lot of sense, because immediately you are saying there that it depends on the specific background.
Yeah, and background is key. A lot of your creditors are going to look at your background in your plan. They're going to look at the fact whether you've gone into a due diligence, if you've understood what's actually caused this company to be in the position that it has been. Are you aware of the key issues? So background is very important just to build confidence in your creditors.
So if we can again link it back to the previous presentation on causality, that is really a direct link.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe also an interesting thing to bring up here is also the fact that turnaround strategy. A lot of the times, I mean, it's not clear by the act, but your turnaround strategy needs to be in the plan as well. You have to basically determine how you're going to turn this company around, what tools, what's your strategy going forward, short-term and long-term, and that has to be detailed in the plan.
Okay, the one point there that I maybe want us to explore a little bit is, I think if you talk about sensitivity analysis, obviously sensitivity analysis cannot happen if there is no a cash flow projection. So what is the aim of the sensitivity analysis there?
Sensitivity analysis came up with us pitching, what do post-commencement finances need? So investors, what do they want in the plan? And they put sensitivity analysis right on the top of their list with cash flow. They wanted to know how were these projections going to alter, change, and what was the repercussions to that. So it's not stipulated in the Act, but don't think you're going to raise funds very easily if that's not in the plan.
Yeah, and as we already know, that post-commencement finance is almost absent in our industry as it stands today. Yeah. Okay, so maybe let's go to the next one. As a medium of communication, you have there number 3, and of course we can't discuss them all in detail, but number 3 talks about the strategic message. Would you want to expand a little bit?
Strategic message is quite an interesting one. It basically entails us that this document is got a sales pitch to it. You're trying to convince creditors to buy into your idea, and you don't have to just put the facts down, but you actually have to persuade them as well. So there's this message that runs right throughout the plan that you need to consider, and that's what we meant by strategic message.
Yes. I think it's a very important part. In the previous slide you had leadership, which we didn't discuss, but that is what leadership must do. They must get that message right.
Actually, it's quite interesting that creditors were more likely to go for a plan with a little bit more flair than a cold clinical plan. So just to keep back in the mind that just financial statements and numbers really don't persuade creditors. Mm-hmm. They want a story. They want to buy into this document.
So immediately also linked to the language that's been used in the plan. Yes. The last one, maybe the structuring of the plan.
Okay, so the structuring of the plan is something that practitioners should consider as well for when they're pitching the plan to large corporations. So let's take an example of SARS. SARS is going to take the plan and disseminate it throughout their departments. So putting sections to your plan and just structuring your plan so that these organizations can break it apart for analysis purposes helps in terms of feedback. And obviously they've got a limited time to get that feedback back to you, so you can also help with that process.
Yeah, so immediately the one above that is the addressing of stakeholders. That's what you are then doing. You must structure your plan accordingly so that stakeholders can respond to their specific sections.
Well,
okay.
Also the thing on the stakeholders is that we obviously can't address everybody's questions in the plan. But what you can also include in the plan is a mechanism for stakeholders. How do they address concerns? Put a protocol in the plan. They're unaware, you're a new practitioner to them. How should they address issues? that protocol is quite key.
Right, so if we move on to the third element that we require in the business plan, I see you use the word transparency. And what immediately comes to my mind is that this is a buzzword. Everything must be transparent for corporate governance and so forth. Is that not necessarily the case?
Well, I think into what we mean by transparency here is, in the South African context, reorganization is quite mistrusted. South Africans don't have a lot of confidence in it. And if you look at the scenario that in most of the cases is that creditors don't have a lot of confidence in this company. They've kept this whole insolvency quite hidden, and now a new practitioner has taken control. They don't know who he is, what he's doing with their money, and so forth. So in order to build that confidence and trust in the whole process, you have to be transparent. A plan's just not going to fly.
So we can directly link it again to when we said that it has to do with the ability of the rescue practitioner to collaborate.
Massively.
Because if you are transparent and people know what you do, then you are collaborating.
And transparency starts, way before the plan is actually published. It's pre-engagement that's absolutely key there.
Okay.
Maybe I should also bring up, when it comes to disclosure of information in the plan, a lot of practitioners they're going to hesitate to put too much information in the plan, because obviously it increases their liability and brings up more questions. However, the golden rule that should be remembered here is that if you're going to withhold information, you have to have a reason for that. Otherwise, it should be assumed that information should be in the plan. Keeping in mind that this plan is a decision-making document. Creditors need to use it to make a decision whether or not to support the rescue. So withholding that information is now hindering the decision-making abilities of the creditors. And you can understand that the problems that can create.
Would you say that rescue practitioners have access to all the information that they require in order to do?
Well, at the end of the day, they hold the final responsibility in terms of disclosure of information.
And the Act makes a provision that there is a time to investigate the affairs, and that's all of that. But often they will face liability of information. Okay, so maybe let's go to contractual obligations.
In essence, the plan is a contract. It's a contract between all the affected parties and the company. And keeping that in mind, this contract has to accommodate certain scenarios. So we've got the provisions for recourse. And what that entails is that we know that based on the sensitivity analysis and your forecasts, alternative scenarios need to be accounted for. So contractually, these have to be accounted for as well. You need to build into your plan scenarios that allow for the practitioner to change certain things, and the creditors need to be okay with that. So that needs to be kept in mind as well.
Yeah, the one sub-point there which interests me a lot on this is substantial implementation. And I've come across this question, and looking at different business rescue plans, I find a lack of the clarification of what the substantial implementation will entail. So what do these regimes tell us about substantial implementation?
It has to be defined. There is a conflict of interest here. Obviously, the longer the company now remains in business rescue, the more the practitioner can benefit from it. And there's obviously this heavy burden of costs associated with the turnaround. Mm-hmm. So for the sake of the plan, it needs to be clearly defined. There is not much of consensus on what is substantial implementation and when the practitioner needs to leave. So we kind of leave that for now in the practitioner's court for him to define himself or herself.
I always wonder, is that where a scorecard will fit in?
I think a scorecard is a brilliant way of dealing with that issue. A lot of affected parties would be comfortable with that as well.
Yeah. So that in the scorecard will be targets to say, once we have achieved this, and this, that will mean that we have substantially implemented the plan. Okay. The final one there, responsibilities to the plan. Is that more about the detail for all the affected parties, what their responsibilities are, or is it purely for the responsibilities of the rescue practitioner?
Well, the thing is, that was quite an interesting thing, is that because it's a contractual document, why not bring in the key players and tie them into the plan as well? There's obviously everybody needs to come on board. So state the responsibilities and show in the plan who needs to do what in order for this to work and get their buy-in on the plan. This also helps in terms of raising finance. Yeah. So if in the plan you've got the commitment, contractually bound creditors supporting the plan, then that's going to help you a lot as well.
Which directly leads us to the next point, which is the securing of post-commencement financing and how to attract that. If that previous point wasn't relevant, because the main other party in the contract is probably the post-commencement financier.
Yeah. Okay. So on the post-PCF scenario, you looked at two different kinds of plans. There's a plan that's looking to attract post-commencement finance, and there's a plan that's already got it secured and is now looking to get the buy-in of the creditors.
So again, the vote.
Yes. Yeah. So with the latter scenario, you're working with the investor. So their involvement, you're not going to address their concerns that much. They're actually entwined in the turnaround strategy. Everything in that document kind of fits their needs. So you're mainly aiming the plan at creditors. Whereas the scenario where you're trying to secure post-commencement financing, what you're trying to do there now is you've got the buy-in of the creditors already. You're trying to present a plan that fits the needs of an investor. So then you definitely need a sensitivity analysis, cash flow statements. That needs to be the main components of the plan.
Okay, I think this is a very, very, very important point that we say there are two approaches that appears here is that you have to have a plan which must be where the funding will be made available if the plan is voted on. And the other way around is that the post-commencement financier is involved, he waits for the vote. The other way around is the voters will vote only if the post-commencement finance exists. It's a little bit confusing, isn't it?
But it's going to change the language of the plan substantially.
Correct.
Yeah, so you need to keep that in mind before even starting to compile this document.
Yeah.
Talk about compiling, maybe I should suggest how one should actually approach the plan. So the way we saw that majority of plans get approached is, first of all, you start with your feasibility study, your reasonable prospect. Show your thinking in terms of why you think this company should be saved, and detail that in the plan. Then a background analysis that show all your creditors that you've done your homework, that you understand the scenario the company is in.
And the causality.
And the causality of the turnaround. Then go to section 150 and comply with all the elements in section 150. Those are non-negotiable, so you might as well get them out the way as soon as possible.
Do we know of any cases where the court has rejected a plan for non-compliance? Are there?
Well, the thing is, it's very easy for the court to do so. You just neglect one of those elements, and the court really doesn't have an option but to reject it. Mm-hmm. So,
although we haven't tested it, we
haven't tested
that
it yet.
It will probably be a fait accompli. Yeah.
But at this point, then you're faced with two scenarios. You're going to go for a reorganization plan, or you're going to go for what you coined a BRIL. And basically, better return than liquidation. So you're going to just wind down the assets. That sort of plan is not really going to be very detailed. It's just going to comply with the minimum of the act and just say, we're just going to sell off everything piecemeal. The reorganization plan is the more complex one of the two. And in that scenario, you're going to first do your pre-assessment of knowledge and expectations of all the affected parties, and then lead to determining whether your plan is going to secure post-commencement financing or is it going to secure the creditor's vote. And based on those two decisions, you're going to then go about drafting the remaining part of the plan.
Okay. When I listen to what you say, one just realizes again that this is quite complex. It is not straightforward. It is not every person that you pull from the street that can be able to put a plan like this together. Do you think that 25 days is reasonable?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, you don't have a choice. You've got the option of asking for more days, which a lot of practitioners end up doing. But this isn't your plan's not going to. You can't compromise the quality of your plan based on the 25 days. At the end of the day, this plan has to secure a vote, and it's going to do that if it meets these requirements. So yes, you're under time constraints, but you have no choice but to produce a good plan.
Yeah, and the other observation that I've made in my past research is to say that what appears is that the good rescue practitioners, whatever good means, really try to comply with this 25 days because they see it as a distinguishing factor of their reputation. So they really try to do it because the message again in that is that we know how important and the cost of time is in this whole process. Wesley, I want to thank you very much. I hope to see Wesley in many more of the presentations that we are producing for this course. And associated with this presentation is the full article that will be in your printed material. Thank you very much.